fiction. When it gets too hot in your kitchen.
The Beat.
This is Herschel 36 on the Beat, Wednesday night, and it's going to be challenging tonight. Now listen, I sometimes drop some clips, some samples from a guy called Ken O'Keefe, and he is ex-United States Marine and Gulf War veteran. Listen to what he's got to say. Very good stuff.
To realize that we are ISIS, that the Western governments that are in bed with Saudi Arabia, who is the primary funder of ISIS, along with Qatar and other Gulf states, we not only provide the political cover and military assistance to Saudi Arabia while it slaughters innocent people in Yemen, but we also provide the cover for them to go ahead and do their dirty dealing with these psychopaths who are running around Syria and other parts of the world as well, Iraq. Let us remember that before the United States invaded Iraq, there was no Al-Qaeda in Iraq. Look at it today. Let us also remember that when Gaddafi was in power in Libya, there was very little Al-Qaeda. And in fact, now we look at it, and it's an absolute basket case full of these operatives.
So, do you hear that? Kenneth Nicholas O'Keefe, born July 21st, 1969, is an Irish Palestinian citizen, an activist and former United States Marine and Gulf War veteran. ISIS is part of the US and the UK military arm. We are ISIS, the extension of the Israeli situation, people.
This is
The Beat.
Don't go anywhere. We have got Joel Skousen from World Affairs Brief on the line, on the Skype line in America. Joel is infamous for his strategic work. He's a political scientist, and he is straight off Alex Jones' InfoWars. Don't go nowhere.
The soundtrack to life in the sun.
This is The Beat.
I wonder what's going to come on next, hey? coming up next is Joel Skousen from World Affairs Brief. I've got him on the other line, and we're going to drop him in any minute now. Joel, can you hear me?
I can.
Great. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we have Mr. Joel Skousen on the other line from the United States of America. Joel has done some incredible work during his career, and I came across Joel when I heard him being interviewed on the Alex Jones show from InfoWars. If you haven't heard Alex, he has some excellent information out there. But Joel, would you just be kind enough to give the people listening, because not many people on the coast here in Spain would have heard of you. They don't know what your message is and your background. So would you be kind enough just to give us a little bit of an intro?
Yes, David. I am the editor of the World Affairs Brief, a weekly news analysis service. There's a modest subscription for it, but I concentrate on explaining the very tragic anomalies whereby Western governments, in particular the United States, have been both, fighting and supporting a war on drugs, terror, and many other anomalies which are not in the best interests of anyone except, the dark side of government. So I concentrate on trying to expose these, what we could refer to as a criminal conspiracy against national sovereignty. I'm a political scientist by training, but I've also worked for many years as a high security architect, designing high security residences and retreats for people, mostly out of my concern that these things aren't going to end very well. And so I've tried to help people prepare. I've written 3 books on the subject: Strategic Relocation, North American Guide to Safe Places, The Secure Home, and How to Implement a High Security Shelter in the Home.
Well, that's right. And you often fly around the world, you talk to various people, and you help people prepare for what may happen in the future, which no one really knows, but strategically you've got a very strong geopolitical point of view, haven't you?
Yes, I probably have one of the best understandings of how this globalist conspiracy operates in the world, what they're doing in Syria, what they've been doing in creating a phony war on terror. And these are the crucial times. I was on in the wee hours of the morning today on Coast to Coast AM with George Norrie again, and went through for 2 hours all of the evidence about the U.S. creating ISIS, the situation in Syria, how the Russians are intervening in that globalist agenda and creating problems for the globalists. So it's interesting that as compared to a year or so ago when I was on Coast to Coast, almost all of the callers were extremely supportive and agreed with this point of view, which means that more and more people in the United States are waking up to the fact that our government is very much involved in creating terror in order to further a conflict-driven globalist agenda.
Okay, so last week I had a gentleman called Ole Damagard on, and we were specifically talking about the Paris shootings that took place on November the 13th. Now, November the 13th is a very poignant date because the Knights of Templar were murdered or executed on this day, and therefore it's been taken on as a sort of sacrificial date for any elite massacre. That's my understanding of it, Joel. But I know that you have an opinion, and I'd like you to go into the Paris shooting and lead us into what's taking place in Syria and Russia right now.
Well, the Paris shootings, like the Charlie Hebdo shooting before it, have strong indications that this was a government-controlled black operation rather than a true indigenous ISIS jihadist type attack against the West. Of course, the both are interlinked, since ISIS is a black operation, a developed by U.S. and British intelligence with the use of Israeli Mossad, Arab, and Muslim agents. But here are the basic facts. In both Charlie Hebdo and the Paris attacks in November, we find the telltale passport being dropped or being carried with the person. Now, no true trained terrorist carries any identification with them unless they're trying to drop the appearance of something to cast blame. But perhaps the most telling thing about both the Charlie Hebdo and Paris attacks are the fact that these two attacks had all the signs of paid hitmen. In Paris, for example, there was a black Mercedes that was being driven by the team of two very highly trained weapons killers who went from restaurant to bars and restaurants, killing people methodically. And witnesses very clearly said these were white men, these were not Muslims. These were not the swarthy appearance of the Middle Eastern people. These were clearly Europeans. So this was a hit team. This was not jihadists going there. And what is also interesting is that the media and the French government is not tracking and looking for that Mercedes. All the news was about this Volkswagen Passat that was being driven by one of the suicide bombers, not the black Mercedes and not the two white people. Nothing except in the British press was carried about these witness statements. And the other telling fact is that as we look into the background of the suicide bombers, at least two of them, that the ones that have been identified have been clearly identified by their friends as non-religious. These were people who were bar hopping, into pornography. One of the woman suicide bombers was photographed in pornographic photo shoots. So these were clearly not jihadists. These were clearly not people doing something for a Muslim agenda.
And it goes deeper than that, doesn't it? Because they were running, the French forces were running a drill in the very morning that duplicated the exact issues that took place later that evening on a Friday. Okay, and also one of the girls, there was a 15-year-old girl who was one of the suicide bombers, and she detonated herself out, at some point, blew herself up. But she's later come out and said she wasn't there and she's still alive. So there's all these inconsistencies that just don't make sense. So why would the West, okay, and when I talk about the West, I'm talking about the UK, I'm talking about Germany, I'm talking about France, I'm talking about the USA, etc. I'm talking about the big banking families, actually. That's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the bankers. I've never seen a terrorist, but I've seen a banker. I've seen lots of them. One of my brothers is a banker, and he's very, very wealthy. Why would they want to create terror in Paris?
Well, it has to do with how the phony war on terror, that is the provoked war on terror, is being used to drive an agenda of taking away legal civil rights that pertain to normal citizens. 9/11 was a government operation, a U.S. black operation from beginning to end. Don't have time in this interview to go through all the evidence, but I cover it in my World Affairs Brief at worldaffairsbrief.com. You can see a link on 9/11 update on the right-hand side of the web page. But the evidence is powerful that this was a government operation. But the world viewed this as a U.S. problem, and it justified, rather improbably, of course, the U.S. going into Afghanistan and Iraq, which had nothing to do with the 9/11 attack. But nevertheless, the world was content to let the U.S. go rampaging through the Middle East in reaction to 9/11. But apparently the globalists want the same anti-terrorist reaction to be implanted upon Europe, and that's why The iconic city of Paris was used in these two attacks. Charlie Hebdo didn't do it completely, so they needed this other one, much more horrific, to cause the French government to react. And they did so in book-like form. They immediately put in emergency operations, taking away people's civil liberties, not to have warrantless searches. And of course, you have arrest without warrants as well being implemented throughout.
I was going to say, that wasn't one of the leading French politicians arrested at some point after the attack on the 13th?
Yes, and you know, they have a pre-criminal emergency ruling now in France that, you know, you can be arrested before a crime as a preventative measure, such as they did at the climate convention there in Europe. So this clearly, the war on terror is useful in preparing people for a type of government tyranny, which will be cemented upon the people eventually through a global new world order, which will come later on.
Because the passport that was discovered just by chance, the terrorist had a passport, he blew himself up, that there were no remains of him or her or whatever, but there was this passport, and of course the passport came from Syria. So what's the link? How does this link back to Syria and what's taking place in Syria right now, and how this actually has a knock-on effect to international relations and the tension between Turkey and Russia?
Well, all of the establishment centers of power are claiming the passport is a forgery. You know, it's really hard to tell what the truth of it is because all of the evidence is in the hand of government, which was probably running this operation. One might ask, why would they provoke the anti-immigration movement in France by having someone drop a passport linking a terrorist to Syria? This, of course, caused a great deal of consternation in Europe. A lot of governments to say we're going to shut down Syrian immigration. Even in the United States, half of the governors in the United States refused to take any Syrian refugees, though they were overruled by the federal government. To a certain extent, one might say it gave them an opportunity to come out and defend the continued use of, quote, humanitarian means to bring in refugees despite this. It also provided an opportunity for the governments to target dissidents of or anti-immigration people as perhaps you know, a coming hate crime or pre-criminal detention for hate crimes. It's very, very clear that one of the globalist agendas in creating this massive civil war, it's not truly a civil war, it really is an attack upon Syria by Western forces, completely created out of thin air by arming rebels, by taking down Libya, by creating discontent and shipping these rebels into Syria and arming them. But one of the major purposes of that was to create this influx of refugees. There is a major agenda to destroy European culture by a continual flood of Muslim people who are simply not compatible in general with Christian civilization. There's always going to be hostility there.
So, Joel, why would the globalists, and you know, I'm sure people are saying, well, who are the globalists, right? You know, a lot of people in this part of the world don't even understand what globalism is. But why would the globalists want to take away the sovereignty within Europe?
Well, that's a hard question to answer in a short period of time. We have to realize, and there's many quotations from people within the Council on Foreign Relations, the Royal Institute of International Affairs in Britain, all of which are globalists, Club of 300, Bilderberg Group, talking about having to destroy national sovereignty and force people into a global new world order. It is about control, and I want to disabuse people of thinking that it's only the bankers. It's not about money. These people are already the most wealthy people in the world. It's not about money or gaining more money control. It's about control of people. It's about getting rid of free markets, even though they expand globalism through the claim that they're doing things for free markets like the TPIP or Trans-Pacific Partnership or the Transatlantic Union, etc. It's all about corporate, and this appears to be about money, corporatism and large corporations which have been suborned and bribed by the globalists to participate in government monopoly type endeavors. These are not free markets. It doesn't take 1,000 pages or 3,000 pages in agreement to establish free markets. This is about control. And what's interesting about, your audience may understand the EU problem more than globalism, but the EU is a nation form of globalism. And you'll notice that in Europe, in the UK Independent Party, as well as the French Marine Le Pen National Front movement, there's a tremendous amount of opposition to further consolidation of power within the EU. And that's one of the reasons why Europeans must understand what Helmut Kohl told the Maastricht Treaty participants in 1997 as they were debating the Maastricht Treaty for the EU and protesting and being reluctant. And he warned them, he said, remember, the only alternative to this treaty is war. And, the people looked at themselves and what does he mean? There's no sentiment for war in Europe. What he meant as a globalist is, we're going to give you a war if you don't go along with this voluntarily. And
that's exactly right. And I think people need to realise that, I know this for a fact, that 80% of laws in the UK come from the EU, and the EU Parliament is an unelected set of individuals, isn't it?
Well, they do have parliamentary elections for the EU Parliament, but it's very interesting that the majority of people elected during the last election were anti-EU party participants. And so this is why the globalists are going to give us more war. And what I'm predicting, of course, ultimately, probably in the next decade, is a nuclear war with Russia and China versus the West that will decapitate mostly Western militaries or the United States military and force the world out of reaction to that devastating preemptive strike to form a militarized global government. We have the UN now, but it has no teeth, it has no taxing power, it has no military. And so that's the change that's going to come, and it will take a war, as Helmut Kohl said, to force people into that, because there's a resistance to that. People want their freedom. They don't want to have to go to Brussels to negotiate some difference. They don't want people in Brussels making decisions for everybody in the EU. Look at the arms being twisted about other EU members to force them to take a certain quota of immigrations, and they don't want to do it, and rightly so.
So where does that leave us moving into 2016? We've had a series of attacks in Europe throughout the entire year. People are on edge. What can we expect from after Christmas? Can we expect anything during Christmas and into the new year? What's your feeling on that?
It's hard to predict when they pull false flags. You notice in the United States, we haven't had no terrorist attacks since 9/11. And 9/11 wasn't even a real terrorist attack. It was a government operation to start this whole phony war on terror. But the United States has a wide open border with Mexico. How difficult would it be for terrorists to get to the Americas, come in through Mexico, and start doing normal terrorist attack, blowing themselves up in shopping malls or hitting electrical pylons? How difficult would that be?
Yeah, it'd be easy.
Not at all. And so you have to ask yourself, why isn't this happening? If terrorism is real, it's because it isn't real. It's controlled. And the reason in the United States that our globalist leaders do not allow ISIS to attack the United States is because the American people would react and say, shut that border.
That's
Close
right.
it, fence it. And they don't want that to happen because they want American voting, conservative voting power to be watered down with a constant influx of Democratic-leaning illegal immigrants who they give, through amnesty, citizenship. And much of that is happening in Europe as well, although it's slightly different because Europe, throughout Europe, you have a socialist country, and you don't have real free markets like the United States at least had in the past. So you've already turned the corner, but there is this conflict creation agenda there where people who do not assimilate well within these nations then create a force for constant social unrest that allows the powers to intervene and destroy people's liberties in the process. Now, notice that in both Denmark and Sweden, you have anti-EU and anti-immigration parties coming up in these new elections that are gaining adherence faster than anyone. And that's why I say this, the powers that be in Europe will not take no for an answer about this. They will not allow those refugees to go back. They're going to force them upon these communities, sometimes 100 to 1. You know, that's how quickly they overwhelm these small German towns where they're being forced to take in refugees. I mean, that's going to change the entire makeup of these small communities forever, to have thousands and thousands of Muslims living within their midst who are not going to integrate well within the society.
Okay, so Joel, just talk to me about the incident between Russia and Turkey. So my understanding is there was a Russian plane that was flying into Syria to bomb ISIS, and the plane went into the Turkish area for 17 seconds, and the Turks shot the Russian fighter down. Is that correct?
Well, you know, there are disputes about that. It's true there was an Su-24 Russian fighter attack bomber bombing not ISIS but Turkish rebels against, not in Turkey, but the Turkmen, who are related to the Turks in Syria, northern Syria, there on the border. At best, the Russian could have only penetrated Turkish airspace in that small spear point area of the border. At best, 9 seconds, not enough to qualify for the so-called 5 minutes that Turkey was supposedly warning Russia. In other words, how do you warn for 5 minutes when you have a 9-second violation of the border, if that occurred? And of course, the Russians dispute that they did have that.
But I think the Turks are saying that this isn't the first time the Russians have jumped over the border. That's what I'm hearing.
Well, you know, when you're bombing targets and you have a border that meanders and curves, you're bombing targets right on the border, it's almost impossible. I can tell you from being a former military pilot, fighter bomber pilot, F-4 pilot during the Vietnam era, you cannot avoid, when you're flying in straight lines and can't turn very fast at 300 miles an hour, avoid little jogs in the border. But even Recep Erdogan, the Turkish president, said 2 years ago that minor border incursions don't merit a military response. He violated that, and I think the U.S. put him up to it. My take on this is that, and this is a fairly interesting military point of view here, you've got to remember that in the past decade, the Russians have been able to eavesdrop on U.S. military forces in Desert Storm and Operation Enduring Freedom, which is, by the way, anything but Enduring Freedom in Iraq. But nevertheless, the Russians let Saddam Hussein fall because they had more to gain by eavesdropping on U.S. military operations, which are preceded by radar and radio frequency jamming. As they come in to drop their bombs, they have to jam the anti-missile systems that Saddam Hussein had in place. So the Russians were able to eavesdrop on all this electronic countermeasures and create counters to the countermeasures. Now, the U.S. has no intelligence about these new Russian systems. The S-400 has never been used in combat, so the U.S. doesn't know what the radar signature is, what kind of jamming they use, doesn't have any operational intelligence on U.S. or on Russian fighters and what frequencies they use to jam as they're coming in. And so I think what they did, the U.S. said, take down one of their jets. That will force Russia to bring out their top-of-the-line defense stuff so that we can eavesdrop on it, so that we can figure out what they've got. And I think that's why they did it, guaranteeing Turkey that we'll let NATO defend you. You don't have to worry about any repercussions. And the U.S. also knew that Russia wasn't ready to take on a full war with the West, and so they were pretty confident they could shoot down one plane and get away with it, and that's what they did.
Well, that's right. I don't think that this will lead to a major conflict. However, I am interested in understanding Turkey's relationship with ISIS. Ken O'Keefe calls ISIS the Israeli Secret Independent Services. ISIS, I don't think, has ever attacked Israel, and I think it seems that there is a direct link between Turkey and ISIS. Is there any truth to that?
Absolutely. You might add to that list of countries that have not been attacked, which is prima facie evidence that these people are supportive of ISIS secretly. Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Turkey has never been attacked by ISIS. Qatar, Bahrain, all of these countries which are U.S. supporters in the Middle East are funneling arms and munitions to ISIS. Let me just give us background to your audience that Syria is not the actual target in the Middle East. Iran is the target. Israel was tasked in 2006 by the globalists to attack Iran, to precipitate a war so that the U.S. could then come in and finish it off. They didn't intend to occupy Iran, but annihilate its military capacity. The reason the globalists are after Iran is the only Muslim country threatening to become self-sufficient in its own armament production. All of the other Arab and Muslim countries are, in fact, dependent on the West for their arms, used to be dependent on the East, on Russia. But Iran wants to be independent, and that's why they've been developing their own weapon systems, rockets, missiles, even nuclear weapons, aircraft, drones, you name it. And that's why the globalists want Iran taken down. But Israel balked about 3 years ago and said, look, we're not going to attack Iran until you can take down Syria, because Syria is the closest retaliatory threat to Iran, or to Israel. And so 3 years ago, the U.S. started to employ a no-fly zone in Syria. A no-fly zone is kind of a misnomer. As in Libya, a no-fly zone didn't mean that you wouldn't be flying. It meant nobody would fly but the U.S., and we'd send in Tomahawk missiles and special forces to undermine the government. They were going to attack Syria in a very real way. Then John Kerry got before a press conference in London, and one of the reporters asked him, well, you know, it's very obvious you're going to attack and take down Syria. Is there any way that Syria can avoid this? And John Kerry just threw out off the top of his head an offer, which he later regretted, saying, well, yeah, if Syria gave up its chemical weapons, we wouldn't attack. And the next day, Syria accepted. And Russia said, yeah, and we'll oversee it.
That's right. Gave Putin a fantastic opportunity, eh?
So all of a sudden, the globalist agenda was put in a halt. They couldn't take down Syria when Syria was agreeing to give up chemical weapons. So after that, about 2.5 years ago, the U.S. went in and basically said, through their Israeli agents, who are the best at infiltrating and leading these terror groups in the name of Jihad, but they're actually working for British and U.S. and U.S. intelligence and Israeli Mossad, and basically said, all right, you guys take about half of the jihadists in Syria and say, you guys are now ISIS. And they gave them the maximum of arms, built them up to a force of about 50 to 60,000 people, and sent them into Iraq. There's tremendous evidence that the U.S. did create ISIS. Most of that evidence comes from the fact that ISIS has been protected by the U.S. rather than be attacked. The Iraqis have videos of U.S. helicopters resupplying ISIS that were presented to the Iraqi parliament. The Iraqis hate the United States now. They're trying to get Russia to come in and protect Iraq as well as Syria, because Iraq just is fed up with the U.S. Protecting ISIS. When ISIS conquered Mosul, the U.S. did nothing to really interdict with air power. There are columns of tanks coming in to Mosul, and when they had a victory parade, ISIS had a victory parade down the major highway, the U.S. military never attacked all of these weapons out in the open, parading down the street. And you can't tell me, as a former Marine pilot, the U.S. didn't know, with all their constant satellite surveillance and air power just a few minutes away from aircraft carriers, they could have decimated ISIS.
That's right, Joel. Joel, let me just jump in there. We've got 4 minutes till the top of the hour where we're going to go straight into the news. And don't go anywhere, people, because Joel will be straight back after the news. But Joel, I understood, rumor has it, that the US has been bombing a road to Damascus for ISIS. and then the Russians have come in and they started blowing up the ISIS US-fed Toyota trucks. Is there any truth to that?
Well, certainly we have pictures of all the convoys of Toyota Hilux trucks, all brand new, same model and same year. You can only do that through one massive purchase. The U.S. has admitted that they purchased the truck, but they claim they gave them to moderates. And somehow, they say, they got into the hands of ISIS. But there is this video online of an Apache helicopter accompanying this long line of trucks. And that really is indicating that the U.S. isn't attacking ISIS. The U.S. has never interdicted until last week the convoys of oil tankers coming out of ISIS-controlled oil fields, which are being sold through Turkey and through President Erdogan's younger son, Bilal, who owns a transportation tanker company. I mean, Turkey is up to their necks under U.S. guidance in supporting ISIS, allowing jihadists to move in and join ISIS, as well as, have the black market marketing of oil on behalf of ISIS.
Joel, why is it that we don't understand this information via the mainstream press? We got just over 2 minutes to go, but it's generally the alternative media that's reporting these facts. Is there a particular reason for that?
Well, yes, the mainstream media is controlled by the same globalists that control, in the United States at least, the Supreme Court, the executive, about 75% of Congress. And they do this because they own the dark side of government. They own the criminal side. The NSA and their spying keeps track on everybody in Congress. They have dirt on most congressmen, and they can blackmail them into submission. Much of this same thing happens in Germany and the UK. The CIA is involved. The NSA is involved in spying on politicians and keeping them in check by threatening them with dirt that they have on their personal lives. So the media, except for some of the British publications, the Daily Mail and the UK Independent have been very open about talking about the record of Turkey supplying ISIS. Nobody comes out as clearly as I do, and Alex Jones, for example, in saying ISIS is a U.S. creation. Even Patrick Cockburn, jumps around that issue, blaming it on Turkey. But it's really true. The U.S. is running this show, and it's a phony war on terror meant to destroy, eventually, liberty and actually create the rationale for a third world war as they continue to provoke Russia in this area.
Well, that's a great little introduction. This is Joel Skousen on the Beat radio station in the south of Spain. Absolutely tremendous stuff. We have got 30 seconds to roll until the top of the hour. Joel Skousen is World Affairs Brief. You should really check out his website and engage with Joel as much as you can, because this is real-time information that you need to understand. So don't go anywhere. We've got another half an hour section with Joel. We'll be looking deeper into the geopolitical situation around the world, what this means now and what it may mean in the future. And some of it's pretty scary. So hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. Don't go anywhere. This is Herschel 36 on the Beat on a Wednesday night in the south of Spain, talking to Mr. Joel Skousen. Joel, are you there?
I am. Good to be with you again, David.
Yeah, thanks. I've got to tell people that I've been speaking to Joel for about, on and off for about 2.5 years, and some of his information is absolutely exceptional, because we're talking about the geopolitical situation, but Joel also gives advice to people how to prepare, not only economically and around the family, but also spiritually, how to engage with God, for want of a better term, in times where that there seems to be a lack of hope. Now, Joel, it feels to me as a dad, right? Feels to me that we are being hurtled into a major conflict, even World War III. It seems to me that the debt cycle is coming to a halt, and the globalists have two options: one, let the system come down, the financial system, or two, take us to war. Is there any truth in those two, in all of that? Any truth for you?
Yes, there is, but I have a little bit different take. I believe one of the reasons why the powers that be have driven interest rates down to zero is to prolong the debt bomb until after the war comes. In other words, I think they're capable with the fairly judicious inflation of the money supply, keeping it below 10% so it doesn't get on to hyperinflation. They can continue to preserve the existing economic order until this war comes. When they've been building Russia and China as enemies ever since they began in 1917, where the globalists gave $20 million to the Bolsheviks to help boost their revolution and cut off arms to the white Russians who were fighting the Bolsheviks. We brought Mao Zedong to power by cutting off aid to Chiang Kai-shek. We brought Castro to power by cutting off aid to Batista. The list goes on and on. Somoza, Nicaragua.
Joel, can we just go back over that? Are you saying that the 1917 revolution in Russia was fed and led by the Western powers?
That's right. $20 million from Jacob Schiff to Leon Trotsky. And when he was arrested with the money in Canada, the Canadians got a call from the White House telling them to let Trotsky go. There was also some $20 million from British financiers to the Bolsheviks, which helped pay off the Tsar's soldiers so that they would not attack the Bolsheviks and kill them in the confrontations in the streets. That's why they shot over the head of the Bolsheviks. A lot of people don't realize the collusion that has gone on between the West in building up these enemies. For example, in World War II, toward the end of it, when it was already, the war was won, we continued to give aid to the Soviet Union. We gave them the rest of the nuclear weapons plans that they couldn't steal at the Manhattan Project. That was discovered by a major who was in charge of Lend-Lease at a Montana air base. He confiscated these plans that he found in big black trunks marked diplomatic baggage. And then he got a call from the White House telling him to let that stuff go to the Russians and not tell anyone about it. And then the U.S. gave the Russians the first enriched uranium in order to explode their first nuclear weapon a year after Hiroshima. They would have been 10, 20 years behind if it hadn't been for the U.S. giving them this technology.
So, is that the same for the Chinese as well? Did the West help develop the Chinese system?
Yes, it did, but more so it has been Russia who has been building China, and they have stopped giving top-of-the-line weapon systems to China, knowing that even as an ally, China will eventually threaten Russia. And so China is now, in combination with stealing technology from the United States and Russia, building their own independent war system. There has been significant evidence that I've covered in the World Affairs Brief of how U.S. corporations, military corporations, have been forced to allow the Chinese to have open access. This happened to used aircraft in the 1990s. I had employees telling me that the Chinese military was having the run of the factory, and employees protested. And so used aircraft shut down their factory on Saturdays, wouldn't let the employees in, but let the Russians have the run of it to copy, not the Russians, but the Chinese, to copy what they wanted. So this is the kind of betrayal that our own government has been doing. This is not because our government is communist. It's because they're globalist, and they have an agenda of creating conflict, creating wars to force people through those wars and horrors of war into a militarized global government.
If anyone is just listening and just checking in on the show now, I'm speaking to Joel Skousen from World Affairs Brief. I first came across Joel when on one of his many interviews around the world with Alex Jones from InfoWars. So Joel, if you're telling me that Western money propelled forward that both China and Russia, can the same be said for the Nazis in World War II?
In a way, yes. Wall Street bankers were the ones that advised the Weimar Republic to inflate their currency, which so discredited free markets that it paved the way for the rise of Nazis and communism in Germany. And Nazis rode to power on the idea that we're going to stop the communists from coming to power. But none of the socialists or communists would have got to first base had not Wall Street brokers induced the Weimar Republic to destroy the currency and hence destroy people's money, savings, and jobs so that it would force people to choose socialism. But Western industrialists continue, after the rise of Hitler, to build the weapons industries through loans and investment in all of these corporations, partly owned by U.S. Wall Street interests. That's detailed in the book Wall Street and the Rise of Hitler by Anthony Sutton. It's a very detailed thing. And so, yes, Wall Street globalists have been in charge. And this isn't just to make money. These people are globalists, not just wealthy bankers. And they are doing this in order to create conflict so that they can consolidate power under their vision of global government.
Okay, so when at the end of the war, the British were going into Berlin, didn't the British stop at some point and wait 24 hours to allow leading Nazis to take the all the wealth from Berlin and hop out to Barcelona and then down to South America? Is that correct? Operation Paperclip.
Yes, the U.S. did give safe haven, but you've got to remember the Russians stole about 2/3 of the top Russian scientists and stripped Germany of all of the industrial machinery and sent it to the Soviet Union on that. The greatest perfidy, of course, was in the fact that the U.S. and Britain knew that Stalin had kept about 20,000 British and American prisoners out of prisoners of war camps that they had, quote, liberated in Eastern Germany, and took them to the Soviet Union and held them hostage to make sure that the U.S. would go through on Operation Keelhaul, which was returning all of the Soviet defectors and people from Eastern Europe who had fled Stalin's reign of tyranny, send them back to Russia. Even though the U.S. complied with that, Operation Keelhaul, the Russians never did give back the 20,000 British and American soldiers. They died in the Gulag, and the U.S. and British governments covered that up. That's one of the greatest war crimes in history ever.
Are we living now in a period where leading scientists went into institutions like the CIA, etc., and now we're living out, those extreme right-wing fascist policies?
Well, in the first place, there's no such thing as right-wing fascist policies. Fascism is on the left. And
True.
So
good point.
This is typical of the European distortion of the left-right paradigm to claim that Hitler was on the right. He was not on the right. He was leftist. Leftist, that is, the left of the political spectrum is more and more government control. So socialism is on the left. Right means less government control, more personal liberty versus government tyranny. So, it's been one of the greatest diabolical, euphemistic things for the left to call themselves progressives and then to denigrate the right by linking Hitler with them, and fascism with the right. It is not.
Okay, so bringing us back now to today's politics and what's going on. What do you foresee will happen between the Russians and the Turks in Syria? Can you see it escalating over the coming months, or do you think the Russians will step down and not take any further action?
Well, this is new territory because the Russians have really put a monkey wrench into the globalist agenda of taking down Syria. I want to also let your people know that the nuclear agreement that the U.S. induced Iran to go along with is a trap. It is not meant to have peace. It was not meant for that purpose. It was meant to increasingly set down a series of requirements so that when the U.S. decides that Syria is taken down and goes back on the attack against Iran, they'll have an excuse in saying that Iran violated the agreement. It is telling that the Iranians have not signed the agreement, and neither has the U.S., and yet the U.S. continues to claim that it's an agreement in force through a gentleman's agreement. They intend to use it as a trap to attack Iran later on, which is the real target. Now, Russia has stopped the agenda, and Syria will not fall as long as the Russians are there protecting it. The Russians are degrading ISIS, and to a larger extent, they are degrading the rebel forces. But they will take more troops on the ground. I expect Russia to start a process of sealing the border between Syria and Turkey on the Syrian side. They cannot trust the Turks to seal the border, and so they'll do it themselves. There are rumors of 150,000 Russian troops coming in. I have not found any credible source to back that up. Even the UK newspaper, I'm not sure it was the Independent or the Globe and Mail that made the edition. They don't cite any source for it. They just say that, the Russians are going to bring in 150,000 troops. Until I see someone confirming that on the Russian side, I'm not believing that, because I don't think Russia wants to get involved in there. They have a lot of potential in using Iranian, Hezbollah, and Syrian troops to do the job. So I do not think, and by the way, there's an awful lot of rumors about the Turkish closing the Bosphorus and the Dardanelles so that Russian ships cannot pass. When I go to the maritime sites that show where ships are and what they're doing, I do not see any confirmation that the ships are being halted or that they're backed up. There may be some delays, but Turkey is not allowed to actually close the Bosphorus except under a declaration of war. And neither the globalists nor Russia want a war right now. Russia doesn't want it because they're not ready to take on the West. Their top-of-the-line weapon systems aren't coming online till 2020, 21, 22, and 23, and 24. But the globalists don't want a conventional war with Russia either, because that does not engender a panic reaction to form a militarized global government. They want to wait until there's a nuclear confrontation. I think that North Korea will be the trigger event for that. I think it's at least 4 or 5 years off at the earliest.
That's right, Joel. And we're just coming into the advert break, but will you hang on for another 15 minutes and just give us some ideas of what we can do and how we can prepare? Okay, this is Herschel 36 back on the beat on a Wednesday night, and it's been pretty intense with Mr. Joel Skousen from World Affairs Brief. Now, Joel, are you still there, sir?
Yes, I am. Okay,
so you and I have talked about the potential for World War III, and I know you've done a lot of research into which specific parts of the world would be a good place to be. Now, I'd like to go over that. How could people prepare for the worst whilst we all hope for the best, But what would your advice be to the people on the south coast of Spain?
Well, first of all, they have to realize that they cannot depend on their governments to save them. They are going to provoke this war. They're going to not defend us initially from the war. I believe that the U.S. military will be about 90% degraded in the initial preemptive strike by Russia and China on U.S. forces, and that will probably include U.S. nuclear or British nuclear forces and French nuclear forces as well, so that there are no missiles available to counterattack. Now, at that point, I think our globalists come out of their bunkers, and believe me, your government leaders are building deep underground bunkers. They know this war is coming. Those deep underground bunkers are not for terrorism. They are for nuclear war. They're not warning you people about it. And so you must get your warnings privately through the kinds of services that we're talking about here today. I think we will see a land war after that. Personally, I think the globalists have some secret anti-missile weapon systems much more effective than what they are using now, which don't have a warhead on them. They will use even space-based, I think, anti-missile systems to stop any further attacks after the initial one. The initial one will cause panic around the world because if the U.S., British, and French militaries and German nuclear forces are taken down in a preemptive strike, it means then that the West has to, or can be goaded into by their leaders into joining a militarized global government in order to prosecute the war. I think Russia will begin in these next 4 or 5 years before the launch of a nuclear attack to consolidate power within the former Soviet states. So you can expect on Europe's eastern border, Soviet Union to do Ukraine-type incursions in not only Georgia, but the Baltics and Czechoslovakia and Poland. Prime Minister Orban of Hungary is already making moves that shows that he's turning back to the pro-Moscow side. I think that a good deal of the original leaders after the phony fall of the Soviet Union in the former eastern states that were liberated were in actuality communist agents. So Lech Walesa, we know now, was a communist agent championing the so-called anti-communist movement. Václav Havel turned out to be a communist agent masquerading as a pro-Western literary person, and various other leaders. So you have to understand that things are not as they seem, and I think you have to prepare for a ground war as Russia, after the nuclear portion is over, will have a conventional attack on Eastern Europe and move into the West. So you in Spain are in the enviable position, as you were in World War II, of probably being the area furthest away from war and invasion, and so that's the place to be. United Kingdom will be a target of war. I think the...
What about Ireland, Joel? Ireland. We've got a huge Irish community here. What about the Irish?
Did you say islands or the Irish?
The Irish, Ireland. Yeah, Ireland, that's right. What about Ireland? Yeah.
Well, there aren't any large military bases in Ireland, so they probably will be free from fallout, because the fallout tends to go from to the east, and so they'll probably be in better position than people in the UK. There are other islands, around Spain. I'm not a real big fan of islands, because if you ever get your food supply cut off, very few of those islands are self-sufficient. And of course, if an invasion force ever comes to an island, you really don't have any escape. So I think Spain proper is the better strategic relocation point for the British expatriate community. Norway and Sweden will be attacked by Russia. They have to control the southern portions of those two countries in order to maintain their warm water exits from the Baltic Sea into the Atlantic Ocean.
Okay, so we've got a few years left, haven't we, before potentially this takes place, because, as you say, the Russians and the Chinese need specific weapons to be online, and they're not going to be online until 2020, 2021, and so on and so forth. So we've got 4, 5, maybe 6, 7 years to prepare. Okay, what would you suggest would be the biggest threat locally in small towns, and what the individual can do to prepare for this, for the safety of their family?
Well, first of all, there will be famine. Famine will be widespread within Europe. You have high density population and a lot of mechanized farming. I think there will be EMP strikes, or nuclear electromagnetic pulse strikes, to take down the grids. So without electricity, nothing in commerce is going to flow for a period of time until that is reestablished. So having supplies of food and water is essential. One of the problems in Europe is that so many homes and places don't have basements, but having basement space is important for two reasons. One, to be able to conceal supplies so they cannot easily be found if there's widespread social unrest. And the other reason is, if you take a lesson from history in World War II, etc., needing to hide people from the authorities who are patriotic people, who are against the tyranny of government, is going to be very, very important. I think that dissidents to government or to globalism, dissidents, anti-EU people will become the Jews of World War III, and you must be prepared with secret hiding places to hide people who are patriotic, and prepare that in advance. It's much easier to do in advance than later on.
And the biggest threat to people, generally speaking, am I right in suggesting it will be other people?
I didn't understand the question.
Okay, so the biggest threat to me as a father, will it be the people in my community? So if I'm in a large city, i.e. Malaga, or a small town, Fuengirola, there's going to be unrest. People are going to get hungry, and my biggest threat will be the family down the road who don't have any food. This is correct, isn't it?
In Western Europe, in Spain particularly, that will be the threat. It will be starvation and social unrest rather than invading armies. I don't think the Russians will get that far before they're defeated, because I think the globalists will cut a deal with China to attack Russia's rear. And just like the West cut a deal with Stalin to attack Hitler's rear. And so Putin will not take all of Europe. I think Spain will be safe except for the economic chaos that will happen through famine and shortages and people's inability to be self-sustaining anymore. And so you're right. I think that in Spain is your major threat. People in Germany and Austria and the Eastern European states will suffer the invasion of Russian troops someday.
I think also before that, I need to prepare myself spiritually and financially as well. So I need to clear, if I've got any debt, I need to clear all my debt. And I need to prepare food, and I also need to prepare some form of alternative bug out, somewhere to go if all of this hits the fan. Would you agree with that, Joel?
Yes, and that's the purpose of my book, Strategic Relocation. It's dedicated to North America, but the principles are the same for Europe. You need to provide bug out locations where you can get away from people. You know, most people have their jobs within the cities, but the cities will become very untenable to live in someday if there's mass starvation and pillaging going on. And so one has to leave for a period of time to the safety of the mountains or rural areas where they can ride this out until things start to knit back together. You've got to remember there'll be millions of refugees fleeing the Russian invasion from the east, and a lot of these will descend upon Western Europe and Spain in particular, making your situation even less tenable than the starving indigenous populations.
Well, that's right, because Spain's going to be seen as an attractive alternative because, you know, there's nothing here. There's no oil, there's no real gold, and so on and so forth. Talking about gold, do you think gold and silver, precious metals, is a good hedge against the forthcoming political and economic instability?
Normally it would be, except that the monetary powers that be are heavily manipulating the price of gold and silver downward. Should be double or triple the price that it is now, and I'm not sure about, they may have the ability to keep it suppressed until war comes. So it may not be a good financial hedge, but this much I'll say, that probably coins are much better than bullion bars because nobody has the ability to verify whether or not this is pure silver or gold. In bars, the coins will be much more easily acceptable. And I really think that silver coins worth less are going to be more important as a barter item than gold coins, because it'd be very difficult to get change for a gold coin worth a couple thousand euros if you want to buy a loaf of bread. So
that's right. I
think the smaller things, in fact, if you have large holdings of gold and silver, I recommend they be liquidated just before war, because cash will be king. They won't be printing anymore during the initial stages of war. So when this social unrest hits, cash will be king. Store up lots of cash prior to that happening.
That's right. Joel, we are coming to the end. We're in the last minute of the time that you very kindly offered us. I would like to say thank you very much for coming on The Beat. This show is called Truth is Stranger Than Fiction. And how can people reach you, Joel, after hearing you on this show?
I would encourage people, if they have comments or questions, to write to me at editor@worldaffairsbrief.com. They can also get a free sample copy just by requesting it at editor@worldaffairsbrief.com, and I'll send them the latest issue, which covers Syria and the Russian shoot down of the Russian plane by Turkey.
The Beat.
Well, that was Joel Skousen from World Affairs Brief. Boy, I feel knocked off my feet. I'm going to hope for the best, but I'm also going to prepare for the worst. And this is Ken O'Keefe. Let's have it. Ken, if you're listening, you rock, kid.
The so-called 19 hijackers in Osama bin Laden is one of the greatest fairy stories ever created. The idea that this man in a cave in Afghanistan on dialysis was masterminding this incredible operation in the United States with 19 so-called hijackers wielding box cutters, Mohammed Atta among them, snorting cocaine and hanging out with strippers in Florida, that these people are responsible for this event in defiance of the greatest military machine in the history of mankind, never mind all of the evidence that's come forward that makes the official version of 9/11 beyond ridiculous. Muslims did not carry out 9/11. In fact, those who blame the Muslims, primarily the Jewish supremacist Zionist-controlled media of America and the government which is controlled by these Jewish supremacist Zionists in America, all of them parrot the same ridiculous, tired old line that Muslims are responsible. And this is an agenda which is intended to create a clash of civilizations. And if we are smart as people, we are going to see the agenda for what it is, and we're going to realize that those who are collaborating in this agenda need to be held to account for literal war crimes and crimes against humanity. And I'm including in that not just the politicians in the military, but those in the media who have perpetuated these lies, because there is no way that they could possibly believe this nonsense. These people have literally sold their soul to the service of the devil.
Wow, I'm knocked off my feet. Thought Joel Skousen was absolutely astonishing this evening. Joel, if you're listening, thanks very much. Now listen, this is You Got a Way of Thinking by Herschel 36 on the beat. Let's have it. Here comes the Queen of England.
My head is banging and I can't get back to sleep, just like an addict who is desperately in need. Interfusion from the top down to my feet. The blood inside me starts to pump as I repeat. Come on, you got a way of thinking. I got a way of thinking. We got a way of thinking, and you got it wrong.
Russia and Ukraine, Iran.
I try to knock one out, sometimes it helps me think, 'cause I'm an addict who is blindly in belief God could save me from my personal demise. I keep on driving when I can't see out my eyes. Yeah, you got a way of thinking. I got a way of thinking. We got a way of thinking. So I wrote this song. Come on kids, sing along, yeah.
My lords and members of the House of Commons, the United Kingdom will continue to deliver on its long-term plan when taxpayers' money fail to pay their staff who lead sexual violence in conflict worldwide. Russia and Ukraine, Syria, Afghanistan, Iran, nuclear organized crime, modern slavery, seize the proceeds. My lords and members of the House of Commons,
bang the kick drum so it matches both my feet. I'm so needy I would even date the Queen. Have you ever noticed her eyes? They rarely move. She's a lizard wearing human leather shoes. You got a way of thinking. I got a way of thinking. We got a way of thinking, and you got it wrong. Come on, I got a way of thinking. I got a way of thinking. We got a way of thinking. Now sing my song.
my lords and members of the House of Commons, the United Kingdom will continue to deliver on its long-term plan when taxpayers' money fail to pay their staff who lead sexual violence in conflict worldwide. Russia and Ukraine, Syria, Afghanistan, Iran, nuclear organized crime, modern slavery, seize the proceeds. My lords and members of the House of Commons,
You got it wrong.
I love the Queen of England. She's one of my favourite people on the planet. If only she was human. Now, truth is stranger than fiction, and this is the beat. Herschel 36 on the beat. Possibly the greatest radio station on the Costa del Sol. Costa del Crime. So, Joel Skousen from World Affairs Brief. That was pretty powerful stuff. I am going to hope for the best, but I'm also going to prepare for the worst, just in case. Now, I often ask Joel, Joel, when people listen to you, they probably think you're absolutely bonkers. And he said to me many times, mark my words, this is taking place. The first time he said that to me was about 3 years ago. And here we are now in a position where the world is a pretty scary place. I'm a little bit concerned about the safety for both my children, I want them to be happy, safe, loved and educated and live a prosperous life. So, here we are. Truth is stranger than fiction. Let's have it. I love the beat.
Truth is stranger than fiction. When it gets too hot in your kitchen. Stranger fiction. When it gets too hot in your kitchen.